Welcome back everybody to Text Adventure Tutorials. We are going to be doing part 2 today, and we are going to be looking at creating an inventory for our hero. I spoke last lesson about creating a loot table, but when I looked at it, we need to create the inventory first of all before we can start putting loot into it, obviously. So let's start with making an inventory. So at the top here, I have all the classes that we set out last time, and underneath I'm going to start defining some functions. And the first function I'm going to define is one called inventory wipe. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to basically create the inventory each time the program runs, and it's going to wipe it for us. So we basically don't want our hero to accumulate, carry on keeping the same inventory every time you complete the game, because there'll be no challenge to that. It'll just get a massive inventory and you can use anything you want in the game. So every time the game is run, we're going to just wipe the inventory. And all we're going to do for that is we're just going to open a file called inventory.txt. We're just going to open this inventory.txt in the right format, and what that'll do is that will actually remove everything that's in there. As the inventory.txt hasn't been created, by running this, it'll actually create inventory.txt. And then we're going to file.close that. So if I actually just call that function, because I have my text adventure on the side here, this should create inventory.txt. We'll see that it probably won't now, typical. There we go. We can see inventory.txt has been created here. At the moment, there's nothing in there. Blank. But that just shows you that we don't actually need to have already made the text file. If we're writing it, so if a file equals open, then opening it as a write file, that means Python will create the file for us. So now we have inventory wipe defined. What we're going to look at is getting our how to actually access the inventory while we're in the game. So I'm going to define another function here, inventory show, and what this will do is every time my hero wants to see what is in the inventory, it's going to print a statement saying you have the following in your inventory. And then it's going to open this file. It's going to open it in read so that it doesn't actually do anything to the file. So we don't want it to be able to do anything to the file just yet. We're going to start manipulating that file in just a minute. So at this point in the program, we just need the file to be opened. So file equals open, and again it's inventory.txt, and this time we are just opening it as a read file. So that's R. I'm just going to do that so get a little bit of space there. Now, whatever is inside that inside the inventory, I'm going to save into this contents variable. Actually, sorry, I'm going to read it into the contents variable. And then I'm going to split the contents variable. So let me just explain what is happening here in just a second. So with this, I have opened the inventory.txt file, which is here. At this point in the game, we're assuming we've picked up some items, so this is going to be populated with some pieces of inventory. We're going to read that information into the contents variable, and then we're going to split the contents variable into a list every time we see a comma. So we'll basically make new positions, so 0, 1, 2, 3. Every time we see a comma, we'll have a list of the inventory, and that's going to make it easier for us in a minute to be able to call the inventory and do certain things with specific items in the inventory. I'm going to print the contents. Now we're also going to do something that now there's loads of different ways to do this, and this isn't going to be the most effective way or the most efficient way to do it just now. I'm going to make the contents variable global. Now what's going to happen is when I run it, it will come up with an error saying it won't come up with an error, it'll come up with a warning saying that you've actually called contents. So they call it here before it's been made global. So really I should make the contents global first of all, and then I should start to call it, but I was having issues with actually making that work earlier. So this way does work, but you will get a warning kind of come up with it. If you find a way, if you see what I'm doing wrong here, please leave a comment and let me know, because I'd be most interested to know why my global variable was throwing up this, well, wasn't working when I defined it earlier in the program. But anyway, this way will work. So if you want to just follow along with me for the time being, this will definitely work for you. So my next point here, on the next line, just going to type this out, and then I'm going to explain what I'm actually doing here. So what I've done here, this is we'll work backwards from the for I in range loop part here. So this is a range loop basically. So we're saying that this is going to print contents this amount of time. So it's going to run through the loop this amount of times, and that is length. So because the length is going to be different every time you run this game, because the amount of items in your inventory is going to be different, you need a range here which actually looks at the number of items in your inventory and then reflects that. So here we're just saying that print every item for I in range length. The length looks at how many items are in the inventory at this time, and then contents here prints each item individually. Now, where it's a little bit more confusing is the line above it where I actually define what length is. So length is the length of contents, okay? So I look at my contents, which is the list, and it's however many items are in that list. But I also have to do -1. Now this is because my contents here are actually going to start from 0. So when I count, I start from 0. So 0 will be 1, and because it's counting from 0, it basically means, but by the time you get to the end of the contents, you end up with an extra item. So what will happen is if I didn't have the -1, if I ran this with just the length, I would end up, by the end of my loop, I would be 1 out of range. So I need to do the -1 at the end of it, basically to make sure my loop is within the right range. It just comes down to this. The list you have will start at 0, and it will go 0 to the amount of items you have. For I in range, okay, that doesn't take into consideration 0. This just needs to know the amount of times you want the loop to run for, okay? If you make it run for the amount of positions that are in the list, you will end up with an extra item. Alright, and then that will mean that your for I in range loop will be out of range. So that is why you need to make sure you -1 at this point here. So I've just realised when I've actually run this program, this inventory show has thrown up a couple of errors, and you've probably realised what they are already. So when I run the program, here, originally I get this invalid syntax here. And that is because when declaring a global variable, I do not need to put brackets around the variable that I am actually declaring. So if I run it again now, I get my second error, invalid syntax is highlighting range, and that is because I have not put the in front of it there. So now that I have the in at this point here, when I run this program, that will actually work. So anyway, that is the inventory show part of it, and we're going to move on now, and we're going to be just looking at the next bit I want to look at the loop check. So we're actually going to this is part of the program here, which takes the loot you've just collected and it actually compares it against what you've got in your inventory. So I'm just going to do loot check. Now, just one thing about this. Unfortunately, because of the way I built the program originally, I made the program badly, and then I kept going back and refining and refining and refining. And what it meant was that I started with a very basic program, and it got more complicated. But it meant that I had to build a basic program first of all, and add the complexity into it. Because we're kind of building a complex program from the beginning, there are going to be the occasional variable which I talk about, which we haven't actually looked at in the actual game yet. So loot X is one of these variables that this is going to appear basically when we kill an enemy and they drop some loot. So it's going to compare. It's going to look at the loot they've dropped, and it's going to help us compare it in our inventory. So like I say, we haven't defined this just yet, but we need it for the loot check. And as we're doing all the inventory stuff at the moment, I thought it would probably be a good idea to do this bit now as we're doing it. So we are going to open up the inventory.txt. And again, we only need to read it. We don't need to do anything else with it. Oh. And again, we're going to split it. So content equals contents dot split. So I don't know what I'm doing there. There we go. So I'm going to split it every time it sees a comma, and then again that will create the new positions for my list. And then I'm just going to put this. This is quite a nice little comparison because it's almost English kind of thing. So if I do if loot X in contents print you already have this item, so you leave so it's quite a nice bit of code here, nice validation check for us. If loot X in content, so it just literally takes this variable and checks is it inside this list. So it's going to just check every position for this list, and it's going to make sure that whatever string or is inside here basically. And if it is, it's going to print you already have this item. Now if it's not, we are going to run something else. So we're going to do else, and we are going to run the inventory. We're going to run the inventory function, which we haven't actually written just yet. So we're going to run that now. Yes, that's the next one we're going to run. So that's pretty straightforward there. It looks, opens up inventory.txt, it reads it, it splits it, it does this quick check. If loot X is in contents, bearing in mind that loot X is something which happens later on in the program when you defeat a baddie. Print, you've already had this item, so you won't be adding it to your inventory. Everything else, run this next program. Run this next function. So I'm just going to define inventory, and I need the loot X variable for this. So I'm going to just carry that along with us. So inside loot X is whatever piece of loot that the baddie has dropped, and I'm going to write that into my inventory.txt file. So I'm just going to open it up. So I do file equals open, and I'm going to open that inventory file again, inventory.txt, and I'm going to open it in append because I want to add something to the end of it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use file.write. Plus So what is happening here then? So I've opened my file as an append, and what I'm saying is that the loot x variable, which contains the item that I've just collected, I'm saying write this into my file here, into inventory.txt, with a comma at the end of it, and then close the file. I need the comma at the end of it so that as I use the loot check and stuff like that, as I split my variables, the comma is what I've chosen to split the variables. Split the items in the list by. So it will just allow me to split every time they see the comma and create lists from that. But obviously, the loot x don't contain commas, so I need to add the comma in at this point here. I hope that bit made sense there. The final bit of the inventory check, I think we've done all the other bits. Yep, so the final part of the inventory check here is actually the inventory delete function. So as you use items, obviously it would be unfair for you to keep those items. They offer little stat boosts, but then they get deleted from the inventory. So we are going to define a function called inventory delete, and again we are going to be using a variable which we haven't actually looked at yet. Decision X is something which happens when we're in the battle state, so this is later on. So basically decision X is whether or not you've chosen to use the item, so we need that actually within this as well. So again, that is something that we'll be getting onto a little bit later on, but we couldn't put all of the inventory stuff together without using a couple of these variables which actually haven't been defined just yet, but we will get to them. So we're going to open up the inventory.txt, so file equals open inventory.txt, and we're going to open it up in read mode. I'm going to read the contents of it. We're going to split them. Content equals itself dot split. See why I said this is such good practice? You're opening, reading, writing, splitting. Then we're closing the file as well. It's always good practice to make sure you close the files that you're using. Now these I've put a couple of print statements in here as well. Basically, because they will help you see what's going on and to see whether or not inventory delete is actually working properly. So I'm going to leave these in here because this actual function which you define is probably the most complicated out of the ones we're going to do today. So I'll leave the prints in where they are so that you can check to make sure yours is working correctly, but then you can obviously remove those afterwards. So I'm just printing the contents here at the beginning so I can see my starting point, and then I'll print it again afterwards so I can just see exactly what I end up with, and I can compare the two just to make sure the whole thing's working properly. So I am going to start off with if decision X in contents. So that's just reminding me exactly what decision X is there. Decision X is the piece of loot that the user has typed. So the user will actually need to type in the piece of loot that they want to use. So if they want to use a health potion, for example, they would type in health potion. And this is just saying that, and it would save what they type into decision X here. And this is saying that if what they type is inside the contents list, then do the following with it. There, we could change that to a numbered system or something like that, something a little bit more user-friendly later on. But we're going to stick with a basic typing it in to begin with. So if it is in contents, we're going to do. Let me just type this and I'll explain what it is. Right, 1 second. Now, unfortunately, it's difficult to show this without the whole thing running, so I'm just going to explain exactly what's happening first of all. Contents.index is going to look for the position of wherever decision X is in contents. Say, for example, this I've said to use a health potion. Find the health potion in contents and then give me its position. That's what index does, it finds the position. So if the health potion was at position 4 in my list, I would be position 4. So then I delete the I, so I delete that position basically. I'm printing them both out again just to check it, and this bit here, this just strips away any extra formatting I had, so spaces and commas and things like that, that strips that away as well. So finally, when I print the contents, that should print out the list exactly as it needs to be. The last bit to do for this is to file. Now again, there's probably different ways to do this, but I'm going to do it probably the longest way possible. Open up inventory.txt, open it up as a write, that's what I want, not read. Okay, so what is going on here then? So at this point, if I've got to this point in the program, what it means is that I will be deleting something from the inventory. So I take everything from the inventory and I'm putting that into contents. I'm splitting the contents, and then actually that needs to be split by the comma, because that won't work otherwise. So I'm splitting the contents by the comma, and then I'm deleting the item which is within content. So like I said, if position 4 was a health potion that needs to be removed, that would delete position 4, and then we'd strip away any extra formatting with it. Now what I need to do is I need to rewrite the inventory. Now this is probably not the best way to do it at all, because what I'm basically saying here is I'm basically saying open inventory again, but open it in write, which means it's going to wipe the inventory. But what it will then do is, because I've got all of the items in contents, it's going to print them out into, sorry, it's going to write them into the inventory one item at a time, followed by a comma for me. So there probably is a way to do that without actually just deleting the entire text file and starting again. But what I found is that was, for this process, that was the quickest way to actually allow me to write the items back into that inventory.txt file. Now you might be wondering, well, why have I actually printed, why am I doing those one item at a time? Why don't I just file.write contents, and that'll just put the whole thing in there. What I found with just file.write contents was that every time it then subsequently ran the program, it put it within another list. So you'd have a list within a list within a list within a list, and it wouldn't work later on. So make sure that you actually use this looping part here to actually write your items back into the inventory. So that is everything you need for the inventory. There's quite a lot to go through today, so let's just have a quick look to see what we've done. So we've done the inventory wipe, inventory show, done the loop check here just to check to see if we actually have it. We've got here where we actually add the items into the inventory, and then here probably the sort of the bulkiest and probably the least efficient piece of code, unfortunately. This piece of code will actually delete the item that is inside the inventory.txt file, and then it will save a version of inventory.txt without that item inside it. Like I said before, all these prints here, so the print context here and the print context there, and these prints here, these are just tests that I've put in there and I've kept in there, because basically later on when we actually start running these things, we'll need to check them to make sure they're running properly. So put them in there for the time being, we'll remove them later on. So that is the inventory check system. We are going to be having a look at the character select system as part of the next thing that I'm going to be uploading, and then after that we'll start with the actual battle thing. So at the moment there's not much we can do with our program. If you start, you can call each one of these systems if you want, but inventory, delete, and then put the decision X in it if you want. However, at the moment, because most of these decision X doesn't actually exist, it won't run at the moment. So over the next few weeks, as we build the rest of the program, these will actually start working and start running. But at the moment, you've just sort of made the foundations for the rest of the program. So next session will be the character select screen. So I hope you have enjoyed this, and I hope you got a little bit out of it. I just wanted to finish up the video today just by showing you again the inventory show bit, because obviously I made a mistake on this but then corrected it. Then as you go through the video you see that the mistake hasn't been corrected. So this is how inventory show should look. So there's no brackets around contents and there is for I in range. Okay, so that is how your inventory show has got to look in order for it to work. So make sure it looks exactly like that. Okay, well, thank you for watching, and I will see you again next time.